Hello, YouTube. I'm just check. Yeah, there we go. I want to pull up. Should be streaming. My channel. So I'm going to do some inking. I've been working away on this today, and I just realized, hey, I should turn the camera on. There we are. Yeah? No. Wait. Let's see. Let's go to live streams. That's not right. There we go. Trying to get the live stream up so I can get the chat up. Do. And here it is. I'm going to pop you out. Okay, so I can see the chat. By the way, I'm also live on Discord. I believe I can copy and say I'm adding to the chat a link to the Discord. Why is here? It'll be right in front of me that way. So I'm using a previous drawing of the same location as a base guide to what I'm doing. There we go. And the tricky part of what I'm doing now is it's actually really tiny. I don't want to over-render it. I'm already doing more detail, I think, than would be possible with a pen on paper at the size that I did the first page of this comic, which I did on paper. And for reasons I'm not going to get into now, I'm switching process to digital. And I would like to not go too insane with the details. But I feel like in some respects that ship has sailed now. As you can see, I'm sort of just doing a scribble texture because at this scale, that panel's tiny. So we really don't need to be seeing, like this reference image I'm using, that's a full page splash. So that's great for having detail. But here I just want the texture. This is a mural. Let's move my camera. There we are. By this lady, this character, she painted it. That's never explained in the context of the story. It's world building for me. Although you might... I tried to do a story here. It's a wordless story, but I tried to do one that there's enough breadcrumbs left around that somebody might put together little details like that. There's definitely a reason she painted this on the doorway. And you learn what this image symbolizes as the story unfolds. I'm actually listening to science shows on YouTube right now. What do you guys do while you're working? I listen to music, different kinds of music depending on the work. I listen to a lot of podcasts. Got like hundreds of them I'm subscribed to. Obviously, don't get to them all the time. Sort of cycle through. It's my personal radio. I grew up listening to late night radio a lot. And a lot of my first long nights of drawing were teaching myself how to draw, staying up late into the night listening to Brave New Waves on the CBC, Brent Bambry, talking about cool stuff. Well, I tried to draw cool stuff. I got into doing college radio because of Brave New Waves. I did a weekly show on CIUT in Toronto for about 5 years. It's a funny story. I was just going to be like, I was into messing around with audio stuff. I had a computer at home that I could do audio mixing on, and this is like 92, 93. So yeah, that's an early computer. But it had Sound Studio 16 on it, on Mac, and I could do some fun cutting and editing. And then I got approached to do an interview by a guy who was producing segments for one of the daily news shows on the college radio station, CIUT. And he wanted to interview me as a comic artist. I just started working at Marvel that summer. And I did that. It's actually an interesting interview. I had just gotten back from New York from a trip, and I had met up with some high school buddies that I dropped out of high school, but we'd stayed close because we were all into comics. And we'd all been in New York. They had gone, at this point they were in college, and they had gone with a trip with their college classmates at OCA, as Ontario College of Art, which is now a university. And one of the guys that had been on that trip, who'd also been into comics, but I didn't know, I was just being introduced to, so he was a friend of my old schoolmates, was Stephen Platt. And he had just gone for his first, so he went to this on this OCA trip to see museums and stuff, but he sort of jumped ship and gotten an appointment over at the Marvel offices and was just showing his stuff for the first time. So he'd been really hyped because he'd gotten in and gone around and seen the bullpen and met some editors and got some good feedback. And I had just been there because I was already working there for a little while. I'd started doing Saint Sinner a few months earlier and had gone for my first in-person visit to the offices. I didn't know he was there, but I ran into him later on hanging out with my friends. So it was kind of a fun kind of, oh, coincidence, you too. And then we ended up doing this interview together. So he was new guy coming in. I was a new guy just in. We were both sort of like local guys just starting out. And then we did the interview with Mike Andrews, who I'd done comics in high school with. And he was still an aspiring cartoonist, comic artist. I don't know if he still draws. I know he sort of ended up doing other things. Comics is a tough business, so a lot of people end up having to make a living some other way. But I don't know that he's ever, if he's continued to make comics or what, on his own. I did it professionally for money for several years, and then decided that I did not like doing it professionally for money. I'm making these wood beams with a hairy line, very intentionally. I'm kind of being sketchy because I want a ramshackle look for this warehouse interior. So yeah, I was doing it professionally for several years, and then I decided that I did not like the industry, so I backed away and did animation and Then some more comics freelance, but more not like trying to do monthly books or anything. Short stories for the big book series, a graphic novel or two. And then I decided I didn't like the work for hire industry, so I stopped doing that. I did some image books. I've done some stuff with IDW. I did a graphic novel with a Canadian writer, a friend of mine actually, Jim Monroe. And we had it published with IDW, and Jim published it, also self-published it in Canada. And we had international distribution with IDW. They did an edition of their own. That did really well. That was a bestseller. I did Dream Life through Kickstarter. It was pretty respectable for me for a book that never had a publisher to back it up. So just me taking it to shows. I was able to sell a couple thousand copies, just solo, self-distributing, which isn't fantastic, but it ain't nothing. And I managed to make it work in terms of money because I did it print on demand. So I did a first run of just under 600 copies through Kickstarter. Those were the first editions, and then I did the rest through CreateSpace, which is now Kindle Direct, which has unfortunately been kind of butchered by the merger, from what I can tell. I don't know. Hopefully get it together. Last time I tried to set up a book, which I did eventually get up, and if you want to get my most recent published book, that's Revolver Zero, which collects work that had been in Revolver 2 to 4. Long story I won't get into now, but I discontinued those and collected most of it for a single edition to end the Revolver line. And so I'm working on my next book. This story you're looking at now will go into Mind Engine, which is a new personal anthology series. Renewal is good. Hello? Sure, who's there? Who's... Hello, good morning. Yeah, I just had to turn off my YouTube so I could hear you clearly. What's up? What's the question? Sure. At the moment, I've been just using this. I'm just starting to getting used to Clip Studio, so I'm not really planning in the. I'm more experimenting to check out the different ones, but I've been sticking with the the Real G Pen, a very thin one of it, for this entire session, and I kind of mess around with a couple of them, but one of the you think of its style, it's usually like a set of choices you make that create a visual theme. And this story, I drew the first page on paper with pigment pens. So thin controlled lines versus like brush lines were already sort of established as the aesthetic. So I'm using a nib that has a very similar kind of feel. So, go ahead. Yeah. So actually, what? Nope. I work. So I started working in comics about 30 years ago, and when I started, it was all analog, and I actually used a computer to do some effects in like a 91, 92, 93, but you couldn't really draw on them yet, practically. Um, Affordable tablets weren't a thing yet, and then so most of my technique is rooted in traditional drawing on paper, and I still do some of it that way, but I've been doing a lot of editing and tweaking and refining up until about 3 years ago. So I would do stuff on paper and then scan it and mess around in Photoshop. And then I've got this XP Pen tablet. I just got that 2 years ago. So I've been starting to really experiment with digital drawing. And so this particular story, I started to do it as a pen and ink drawing or a story, and the first page was done. And so you actually can show it to you. Yeah, there it is. That's the first page, and this is a scan, but it was originally done with pens on paper. And so, and what I've been doing is I would do a rough sketch, and then scan that and make what's called blue lines. So you turn all the loons blue, and then print it out on Bristol, and ink on that, and then that's great because if I mess it up, I can print another one. And that's great, except my printer, the heads aren't working, so I can't make blue lines. So I decided, well, hell with it, I'll just try drawing it directly into Clip Studio because I want to try learning how to use Clip Studio. So that's what I've been doing with page 2 here. I just finished a panel, I think. I'm going to look at it for a second. I think it's at risk of being a little over, like, comparison. Let me see, get it to fit in the window. It's, this is one of the risks of digital. So you can always go in way tighter than you can with ink on paper. So the details are getting a lot finer than they did in the first one. But I think stylistically it's staying in the right ballpark. I could do this. You know, like that's 100 and what's sorry, I'm still figuring out what things mean here. So I think this is, so that's supposed to be 100%. view, right? So I'm just like, I'm going to show the half the page here. So this is supposed to be the same size, and that's not bad. It's good. It's fairly detailed, but you can see how much more detailed I'm getting digitally. Whoops, there. It's just way finer. Like all this stuff in here, I like it, but I couldn't do that with the pen on paper. It's just too fine. My eyes aren't that good, and my pens aren't that fine. So, but you can do it like digitally just by doing this. I can zoom right in, and which is great. But it means that there's going to be a slight jump in resolution in the story. That's okay though, because this is the first page, so it's sort of like a splash. I don't think it'll be too jarring. But I mean, to answer your question, it's a little bit complicated because I've done both. But in the case of the one I'm doing right now, it's pure digital. I'm trying to think now. Did I do how much? Actually, I did. I think I did the pencils on paper on this one. So let me just turn those off. This was done on paper. So some has been cut out. So these are my pencil roughs. They were done on 8.5 by 11 paper. And actually, like there was a color pencil that I did for the sketching, and then I went through with a pen and pulled out the stuff I liked, and that's the lines you're seeing now. Here's all those pen lines, just sketching out real quick. So that's my rough. And so I'm turning that blue, making it faint. And that's my underdrawing. So I haven't done those panels yet, but I just finished those two. Even fainter. There we go. Thank you. Well, let's give it a try. What do you want to know? About that, yeah. Mm-hmm. You're trying to work on a what book? A comic book? Yeah, okay. Any way can work, and I think that question has more to do with like what do you have the means for these days? Like they all work. There are some people who are real like who are real hardcore traditionalists, mostly just because they love it. Like, and I understand where they're coming from. I really enjoy working on paper too. And if you enjoy it and you don't need to work digitally, there's no reason you have to. It does present, like I've been working in a hybrid mode where I do the blue line printouts, and I can do a lot of, if I don't like something on my pencils, I can use Liquify and just change whatever I like. In that intermediary, once I scan it, I can go in and tweak stuff. And so that worked fine for me. The only thing that's keeping me from continuing to do it right now is that my printer's misbehaving. So just simplifying things by going straight to inking on the tablet, which I started doing that for commercial reasons. And I wouldn't even actually say it's faster, but the advantage with commercial situations is that assuming the client's paying enough to make it worth your time, when they ask for lots of changes, it's not as much of a headache to change them because you can cut and paste and tweak things digitally a lot easier. So that's the place where it really pays off. And I think that there's means, and then there's the what's your application and what are you going to try to do. It might make some of jobs easier, and other jobs, arguably, and depending on the personality of the artist, it might make things slower. So it's not necessarily the greatest. Some people really work better if they just simplify their process and they're just working on a pencil and paper. Like even what I'm doing now, inking, I'm kind of going for a traditional comic aesthetic, but there's no hard reason that you have to do that anymore. The only reason, like the whole reason ink and line became the norm for comics had to do with printing and reproduction technology and its limits back in the day. Sort of kind of evolved out of etching, you know? And now that we've got to the point where you can really produce not just color work just by scanning it, like you don't have to do complicated separations or all sorts of craziness that used to go into doing print work. And you can even reproduce pencil lines that used to be impossible to capture the subtlety of now. There's artists like, in my cartooning class, I always use this as an example when I bring up the question of how do you want to learn to finish your art. So rather than just thinking of inking, think of your finishing options are. Renee French is a cartoonist who did kind of punky cartoon art in the 90s, sort of underground looking. And she was always frustrated by, she would like her drawings at the pencil stage, but then thought they were ugly when she inked them and could never get the finish she wanted. And some people work through that and find a technique and a style that makes them happy, but she realized, well, do I have to ink it? And started working in just pencil. And she's kind of gone off on a really interesting tangent, but her work's gotten much more sophisticated and subtle just by not trying to conform to sort of the expected idea of what comic art's supposed to look like. And another one I really like who does that is, what's her name? She works in Ballpoint. Right in front of me here. Oops, except I can't see the spine. Emile Ferris. Emile Ferris. My Favorite Things is Monsters is her last book. And she did that all on lined paper with ballpoint. But it looks great. And it works for the story. So it kind of depends on like what do you want to do with your stories and what do you think aesthetic fits it best and what's your preferred tools and how are you going to market it and like I like line work partially because I can print cheaply in black and white, so I don't have to think about color, which is cheaper to print and less time to plan if I don't have to work with color as much. So sorry it's not a direct answer, but it's sort of it's kind of like what do you want to do, and then figure out what suits that. Yeah. Tech-based drawing, like digital drawing, is great, but it's also, not everyone can afford. It's gotten cheaper, but not everyone can afford this gear. It's not always practical. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, professional artists almost always use reference for one thing, just whenever they're trying to draw something specific. There's always times where you want to do reference for a particular thing. I don't need a lot like these pages because this is a sort of sci-fi fantasy. I don't really I didn't really need to reference anything on this page or the previous one because nothing's something here that I haven't already drawn before. So I'm already familiar with it. But as soon as you run into something that you don't know, you should totally pick up reference, and to inform your eye. It's reference is just another way of drawing from life, and then beyond that, you never like for the whole point of blue lines and rough drawings and stuff like that isn't to be perfect. But if you overwork them and you spend all the time making those exactly right, then you just end up with very stiff work when you go to finish it up. I mean, basically, you might as well be finishing it. So I save that. I don't. My roughs here you see in blue weren't meant to be to have solved all the problems. And then the trick is not to get into tracing the work, but actually revising and trying to, like you said, like improve on and make the lines a little bit more clean and figure out any problems that you created for yourself. Like right here, I'm trying to figure out how to show the angles. Like this is a stairwell going up, so it's not same level as this. So I just want to do like a faint line. But it's more of just a transition. There's going to be hatching that'll stop. And then I want a few remnants of a line to show the edge. So you're just always pushing the drawing a little further. And it ends up being a lot more calm way to work too, because you're not trying to be perfect the first time around. You get depends on how many stages in your process there are. I tend to do 3 drafts. So there will have been a rougher thumbnail version that I mentioned before in a colored pencil that was underneath what's on the blue here. And then I cleaned that up with the pen lines and I've turned them blue. And now I'm doing a second pass. And these will be the final ink lines. So, and that's pretty close to traditional, like thumbnail, pencil, inks. I've done books. I did a book called Dream Life where I kind of made a point of doing even more. So I had like 5 stages. The work got a lot more refined. And it's not very practical, time-wise, but I wasn't trying to be practical in that one. It was a personal thing. But it's, again, that sort of depends on what your job is. If you're doing an illustration job on a deadline, then something like just having those 3 stages is nice and efficient. Lets you get it done and move on to the next thing quickly. It's also when you're doing professional work and clients are going to have a look at each stage. Just like you wouldn't, like if you overcommit to your roughs and you find that you did something, you got the continuity wrong, something's backwards, whatever, and you have to go redrawing all of it. If you've spent a lot of time making a pretty drawing and you've got to erase half of it, you're not going to feel very enthusiastic about that. It makes it a lot more palatable. So like here, straightening up the banister lines here. I'll need to pull out and check what I'm doing in a second. But the if I spend too much time on the first stage, it just slows down and makes the next stage stiffer, and I won't fix mistakes because I'll feel precious about it. You know. Does that answer the question? Okay. There you go. Where are you? Yeah? So you're thinking about drawing for... What's the market like there? I don't know. Yeah? I knew there was some... I remember reading about some big events like conventions and stuff starting to happen. Yeah, well, not much is. Yeah. No, I haven't been there either. I'm actually not. I'm not a fan of that aspect of the U.S. industry, like just the huge spectacle stuff. But it's a lot of people see it as a sign of a healthy industry. But well, that's a lot of the Toronto, sorry, not Toronto, the San Diego Comic Con, the huge one in the States is like that too. The fandom pop culture thing. Oh yeah, totally. Hollywood started taking over. So it's that's the stuff that I'm not kind of turned off by personally. I don't know about you, but the stuff that I like are, so in North America, the language that's usually used is, we'll talk about Comic Cons as being sort of like the celebrity oriented fandom stuff, and then comic festivals are usually more publisher and artist oriented, and they're specific to being comic shows. Like a lot of comic conventions even stop calling themselves comic conventions; they'll call them fan expos, and that's a chain of conventions as well. Like that's a branded name, but there are also a lot of other shows that will say that they're a fandom event or something. So they've dropped the conceit of just being a comic show. Whereas the comic festivals are usually pretty committed to just specifically being about comics and comic publishers and creators, and they're the kind of events that would have like librarians would be featured guests. Readings, kind of the point. Not getting a picture with Patrick Stewart, as cool as Patrick Stewart might be. So I really like the festivals. They're usually great for could be, yeah. Some of them, the Toronto Comic Art Festival, TCAF, actually had what they call, I think it was called Comic Balloon Academy or something, which was a series of workshops before the main show that was for artists to go to and learn from other artists and stuff. This year we did it by video because, of course, no one was going anywhere. Probably more, yeah. I've been online for a while, but I've noticed definitely there's a lot more. Like, I couldn't keep up with all of the online versions of comic festivals that happened in Canada. There were so many YouTube videos and stuff, it was just impossible to see them all. I'll be watching them for months. Yeah, I know him. Yeah. Carl, what? Oh, Proco. Yeah, yeah. I've watched their videos for a while. Kim's pretty impressive. Proco. That's his channel. I think that's who you're talking about, isn't it? No? Somebody else. Kopinski. Is he one of the artists who works with Kim, like under the same? I forget how you say the name. Sort of like a studio imprint. Okay. No, they're more concept artists, aren't they? Yeah. Even Kim, he doesn't really do comics very often. He's done some manga, but it's been a while. Yeah. Yeah. He did. I've never actually had a chance to read them, but he did do a few manga. But a lot of the stuff he gets known for these days are his just sort of free flowing illustration work, which is cool to watch him doing. A lot of just sort of thinking on his feet. Great improv work. You ever heard of improv, like as an exercise? Well, and it's most people know about it through theater, improv theater, but you can apply the principles of improv to sketching. And a lot of what they're doing is essentially that. I mean, I'm not sure if they necessarily use the same uh, associations when they're talking about it. I haven't seen Kim Jong-gi talk about improv per se, but what he describes how he works is really similar. It's sort of, I always say to my students, it's not that he doesn't make mistakes, it's that he just improvises and makes things work. But you're looking for him, you'll find lots of stuff that's technically like, that's not anatomically correct, or that's just a little weird, and there's lots of rough sketched in bits. But he knows that, like, first of all, people aren't looking at the work trying to find your mistakes, so you can kind of fool around and have looser work that, you know, draftsman wise perfect stuff isn't necessarily the best work. It's just very time consuming, and it's not what the audiences are going to see, because they're looking to play along, not to find out what you screwed up. You know, so you give them a story, you give them a visually interesting story that's compelling, and then they don't care. Doesn't matter if that arm's a little too short or whatever. All the things that when you're just starting out, people worry too much about. Kim's really a great example of someone who's figured out, no, that doesn't matter. What matters is that this is interesting. And if I'm playful and let my imagination go and just say yes. So like one of the improv rules is you can never stop the flow. So it's always yes and. So if another improv actor presents you with a situation and you can't say, well, that's stupid. You have to say yes and add to it. And yeah. And so when you're drawing, instead of going back and erasing stuff too much, you try to say yes and just figure out how to move forward and work with what you have. And I only really undo and erase stuff when it's just like, all right, this is just not salvageable. Let's go. It's not working. You can make that decision, but don't make it prematurely. I'll usually keep moving and see if it works out. And then if I still see that thing that was bugging me, then I might finally get rid of it. But frequently, I just ignore it and it disappears. It turns into something else. Yeah. You can still get hung up sometimes too. Like there's things that'll hang you up, but it helps. You definitely learn. But I mean, experience is useful, but I don't think there's anyone who doesn't have stories or situations where they get hit a wall for some reason. It ends up being, as you get more experience, the main thing is it ends up being less technical problems, because you kind of figure out, okay, I'll just figure that out as you go, and nothing is catastrophic. It's just karmic art. Do what you can. If it's not perfect, that's fine. It ends up being other kinds of decision making in the storytelling process for comics. It's storytelling, and they're a part of the challenge. The thing that can hang you up is it isn't about that there is a wrong answer. It's more of the how-to, because it's no longer a situation where a rote answer works. Like if I was just doing a normal comic, for example, then how to depict the corners of a room is never really a question. Like I'm doing it right now. I'm drawing edges of walls and stuff. You know, it's straightforward. But I'm working on a memoir comic about my memories of my childhood, my father specifically. And I was trying to figure out how to draw. When he died, I was in the emergency room for a while while his girlfriend at the time went in to see. They had to identify his body. So I was a little kid. I was like 8, so they didn't bring me into there. And I just stood by the nurse's station. And my memory of it is confounded by two things. One, I'm aphantasic. I don't actually see pictures in my head. So it's not like I have pictures in my head of what that room looked like. So I had to go, and one of the debates I had was the story. That story I'll draw more sketchy when memory is less reliable, but when I can get photo reference, I'll draw more accurately based on the reference. And so it has this waning. It's meant to be kind of like reflective of how memory feels. There's parts of it are less concrete. Um, and so what I did is looked up to see what I could find out, and I found like pictures of the same hospital's waiting room 20 years earlier. So that's like in the 50s, which it definitely didn't look quite the same, but I think they had the same shape. But I also realized looking at it that, okay, that's interesting because it's not how I remember it at all. I remember seeing an ambulance bay with two-way doors that you would open, and that's not there. It doesn't exist. It's down the hallway. And I knew it wasn't entirely surprising because I knew that my memory had been colored by dreaming about that day for years as a kid, and at this point I know that my memory is contaminated by the dream. I remember more the dream than I remember what actually happened that day, probably, because I relived it that way. And so it's kind of the interesting adventure part of it for me is like backtracking for, okay, what actually did that look like? Because my dream looked like this. And then when I sat there and thought about it and tried to compare my dream to what I saw in the picture, the thing I realized is that I normally remember, because I don't see pictures, I normally remember spaces by structure. So I'm really aware of like where the corners are, and that's how I map my presence in the room. Like, where am I roughly speaking in that room, and then how far were things away from me, and I can kind of keep from an informational map of my space that way. So that's how a lot of my memories of rooms are encoded. And I realized that I had no actual awareness of the corners of the room, of the waiting room at the hospital at all. So it definitely didn't feel like it was an accurate description of my memory to draw a room with corners. But then how do you draw a space without corners? So I spent like 2 weeks trying to figure out how to draw a space without corners. So that's where I hit the wall, was in that weird technicality of like, oh, okay, I've just created a problem for myself. This is a weird puzzle. So those are the art things that end up stumping you as you get more experience. But you always run into something. You'll make a problem for yourself. It's like that, and then you spend a couple weeks going, I can't figure out how to draw this. I'll have to draw something else for a bit until I can figure it out. So trust me, though, they're just as frustrating because you're not getting anything done. You're just sitting there staring at it, going, but oh. Anyway, you still have eureka moments as you get old. You've been doing it for longer, I guess I should say, not so much getting older. But they're the thing that becomes a little less frequent, like that sort of like the buzz of figuring something out. That happens less often as you get more experience. It still happens occasionally, but I have to say I kind of miss that from my youth. So the grass is always greener in some way. At least the ones that you're encountering. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, so this is the first time I've actually done. I just discovered Discord Head video, and I've been doing stuff on YouTube, live streaming, which I'm doing right now too. I don't think YouTube can't hear you, but they can hear me. So I've been doing that for a while, but I don't have a schedule. I do it when I'm remember to turn on the camera and I'm actually getting some work done. So we'll see. Have you been? How did you find the Discord link? So you saw me post it there. Okay, yeah, cool. I thought that would be an interesting option because I can't. The chat doesn't have any like audio function on YouTube, so I don't know when people have posted. I don't hear a notification or something. So I'm often seeing their comments well after it's been there for a while. Yep. Those are the two guys you were mentioning earlier. So you're watching them on YouTube? Ah. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's some kind of drawing where I really can't talk and draw at the same time. Depends on the inking is a different. I don't know. It's a little more. Once I've figured out what the style guide for a book is, like the set of tools I'm going to use and the kind of lines I'm looking for, it becomes a bit more Zen automatic. But when you're composing and penciling, that's more like writing. You can't use more of your brain. Can't really do other things at the same time. I'm tempted to like draw very accurately what her gear looks like, but it's going to be so small. I actually know that I can easily overwork it. So I'll keep it open and simple. Nope, too big. There we go. That's more proportionate. Do I take students, you mean? Yeah. Um, so it sort of depends. Like the baseline thing is just $10 a month, and that gets you an hour of time and feedback on homework you can send me, which isn't a lot, like an hour a month. But it felt like when I was offering more, people weren't using it, so I brought it down to $10, but also reduced it to just the hour, and that's been going okay. And then I'll give feedback sometimes through video if we can arrange a live meetup. I'll do that sometimes, but a lot of it's been they send me their stuff in email and I'll look through it and give them feedback and a recording. And I took on a young student in Thailand starting yesterday, so I'll be giving him homework assignments and stuff. So it kind of depends. I tend to customize it to the student, like what they need. I've been teaching courses at a place called Sin Studio in Montreal for 6 years, and so I can kind of teach similar subjects in terms of already have course outlines for those. But generally, I like to try to teach tailor to what the student's working on and what they're interested in, especially if I'm doing it one-on-one. So then there's no real... I need to check my continuity. What did I draw for her boots or shoes? There we go. Yeah. Somewhat variable. I've taught dynamic drawing, which is gesture-based drawing, for 6 years. So it's like a life drawing observational based program, and I can probably adapt that to private tutoring, and then I've been teaching cartooning and making comics. So all of that sort of pre-existing course outline structure that I can adapt. And then I would also probably just sort of look at what the person's doing and what they want to draw like. Like we'd probably get into life art or whatever if it was relevant for the student. Anatomy studies, perspective, whatever. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Cool. It's been interesting, like using Zoom to do feedback for, because the classes at Sin Studio are continuing too, but we've gone online. So all my courses have switched to doing all online. And in some ways, I miss it, being able to walk around and actually look at students' work in the classroom. That's definitely a downside. But being able to do notes through, you can use Zoom or other programs to record your feedback looking at the work and do drawovers and stuff. That's actually a really powerful tool, I find. It's pretty effective. Continuity again. Right. I think I maybe made these a little too form-fitting. Oops. Did I have a seam on the outside? I forget. I did a little bit of one down there. So I'll probably do this. Yes. Too thin. So I'm going to turn my video back on. Oops. that's going to include that. Yes. Continuity. Nope. An hour and 18 minutes. Okay. I think I'll call it here. This is probably call it a night. Come back to this. Yep. Take it, everyone. If you want to check out my Patreon, go patreon.com/salgood. And yes, I do take students. Was it Glitter Pony asked about? Yeah. You could sign up there and could do stuff. Getting a weird effect because I can hear my video There it is. Good enough. There we go. All right. Good night, everybody.